There was a man in his late 60s who often described his days the same way. Nothing is wrong, but something feels off. His life was stable. Nothing major had changed. And yet, his mood felt heavier. Not sadness exactly, just a quiet sense that things didn't feel as light as they used to. At first, he ignored it, assuming it was just part of getting older. But one day, he noticed something small. The way he talked to himself was different than before. And that's when he realized it wasn't his life that had changed. It was the way he was thinking about it. Mood is often linked to what happens around us. A difficult day, unexpected news, changes in health, or family situations. And over the years, many of my patients believed their mood depended entirely on these outside events. But in my experience as a physician, there was another factor that played an even more powerful role. The way we think, not just what we think about, but how we think. The tone of our thoughts, the quiet conversations we have with ourselves throughout the day. Most people are not fully aware of this inner dialogue. It runs quietly, in the background, while reading a book, while sitting near a window, or while walking slowly through the neighborhood park. I remember many older patients telling me they would sit alone in the evening, perhaps flipping through old photos or reflecting on their day. Nothing dramatic was happening. Yet inside, their thoughts carried a certain tone. Sometimes calm, sometimes critical, sometimes focused on what had changed, instead of what was still possible. Over time, that tone begins to shape mood. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but gradually, like a quiet shift in the background of daily life. A person may wake in the morning, open the curtains, watch sunlight move across the floor, and yet feel a subtle heaviness they cannot fully explain. Nothing appears wrong. Life looks stable, but inside, something feels slightly different. Less ease, less lightness. And because this change is subtle, it is often difficult to trace. People may look at their lives and find no obvious reason, which makes the feeling even more confusing. But the mind is always interpreting, always framing experiences. And when that framing becomes more negative or more critical, it influences how everything feels. Even small daily moments, even quiet ones. This is why awareness of thought patterns becomes so important after the age of 50. Because they operate quietly, often unnoticed, but their impact is very real. The man who felt that quiet heaviness in his mood did not immediately connect it to his thinking. Like many people, he assumed it was simply part of getting older. Something natural, something unavoidable. But one afternoon, during a quiet moment, he noticed something small. He was sitting alone in his living room, reading a book. Sunlight filtered softly through the window curtains. The room was peaceful. Nothing was wrong. And yet, a thought passed through his mind. I'm not as capable as I used to be. It was not loud, not emotional, just a simple sentence. Quiet, almost casual. But later that day, he noticed another thought. I'm getting older. Things are harder now. These thoughts did not arrive dramatically. They appeared in ordinary moments. While walking slowly through the park, watching other people pass by, or while sitting quietly, looking through old photographs of earlier years. At first, he did not question them. They felt natural, reasonable, even factual. But over time, he noticed something important. These thoughts repeated day after day, in small moments, during quiet reflection, during stillness, and slowly he began to see the pattern. His thoughts were becoming more limiting, more focused on decline rather than possibility, more focused on loss rather than adaptation. So he made a simple change, not dramatic, not complicated. He began to notice his thoughts instead of automatically believing them. And when a thought appeared, he paused, just briefly, and asked himself a gentle question. Is that completely true? Sometimes it was, but sometimes it was only partly true. And that question created space, a moment of reflection, a quiet pause. And in that pause, his thinking began to shift, more balanced, less critical, more compassionate toward himself. And over time, his mood began to change. Not dramatically, but noticeably, because the way he was thinking had changed. Negative thought patterns rarely appear all at once. They develop slowly, over time, often without clear awareness. And in my years working with older adults, I noticed that many of these patterns were shaped not by major events, but by repetition. Small thoughts, repeated quietly, day after day. At first, they seem harmless. A comment to yourself like, I'm not as strong as I used to be, or I can't do what I did before. These thoughts often appear during quiet moments, while sitting alone, looking out the window, while reading a book in the afternoon light, or while walking slowly through a familiar park, noticing how the pace feels different than it once did. None of this feels dramatic, but repetition creates familiarity, and familiarity creates belief. Over time, these thoughts begin to feel like facts, not opinions, not temporary feelings, but truth. And this is where the cycle begins. Thought to feeling to reinforcement. A limiting thought appears. That thought creates a subtle emotional response, perhaps a small sense of discouragement or hesitation. And that feeling reinforces the original thought, making it more likely to appear again tomorrow, and the next day, and the next. Over time, this cycle becomes automatic. The mind begins to default to limitation, to comparison, to remembering what used to be, instead of noticing what is still possible. I recall many individuals who spent long periods reflecting on past abilities, looking through old photographs, remembering younger years, not in celebration, but in comparison. And comparison often leads to discouragement. This pattern does not only affect mood, it affects behavior. People begin to hesitate, avoiding activities they once enjoyed, walking less, moving less, engaging less. Not because they cannot, but because they believe they cannot. And that belief becomes self-reinforcing. But the most important thing to understand is this: thought patterns are not permanent. They are learned. And what is learned can be changed, but only when they are recognized. Because without awareness, the cycle continues quietly, unchallenged. Changing thought patterns does not require force. It does not require perfection. It begins with something much simpler: awareness. Noticing the thoughts that appear, without immediately accepting them. In my practice, I often encourage patients to create quiet moments during the day. Not long ones, just small pauses. Moments of stillness, perhaps sitting comfortably near a window, watching sunlight move slowly across the room, or taking a short walk in the morning, feeling fresh air against the face. These quiet moments make thinking more visible because when life slows down, the mind becomes easier to observe. Another useful approach is gentle questioning, not arguing with thoughts, not fighting them, simply asking, "Is this the only way to see this situation?" This small question creates flexibility. For example, a person might think, "I'm slower than before." That may be true, but another perspective might be, "I'm slower, but more careful, more aware, more intentional." That shift in interpretation reduces pressure and creates emotional balance. Over time, this practice becomes easier, especially when combined with calming routines, such as gentle stretching in the morning, or slow breathing before bed, or even a few minutes of quiet meditation while sitting comfortably. These habits support mental clarity. They calm the nervous system, and when the body feels calmer, thoughts become less reactive, less rigid, more flexible. And this flexibility is what changes mood, not instantly, but steadily. Consistency is the key, not intensity. Small daily awareness creates powerful long-term change. Because the mind, like the body, adapts to patterns. And when new patterns are repeated, the mind begins to respond differently. Mood is not always determined by what happens in life. Sometimes, it is shaped by how we interpret it, the thoughts we repeat, the quiet conclusions we form about ourselves. These silent patterns influence how we feel each day. I remember many older adults who told me something similar. "Nothing is wrong, but I don't feel like myself." Their lives were stable, their routines unchanged, and yet their emotional world felt heavier. What they eventually discovered was not a problem in their lives, but a shift in their thinking. The way they spoke to themselves had slowly changed, becoming more critical, more doubtful, less forgiving. But the encouraging truth is this: change is possible, not through force, not through pretending everything is positive, but through awareness, through noticing the tone of your thoughts, perhaps while sitting quietly in the evening, reading a familiar book, or reflecting on the day, or watching the early morning sun rise slowly, casting soft light through the trees. These quiet moments are powerful because they allow the mind to slow down, to observe, to adjust, to soften. And sometimes, that gentle shift is enough to change how the day feels. Not dramatically, not suddenly, but steadily. A lighter mood, a calmer outlook, a greater sense of emotional balance. Because in the end, we are not just living life, we are interpreting it. And that interpretation shapes our emotional world. The hopeful part is this: even small changes in how we think can bring back a sense of lightness into everyday life.